You know what? I'm kind of surprised that Gerard Butler isn't in this movie. Because this is yet another film with really bad CGI and terrible green screen. It's Gods of Egypt and London Has Fallen all over again when it comes to the visual effects. So Allegant is the third and final book of the Divergent trilogy, even though I guess there is a spin-off book under 4's perspective or something like that. I think it's just called 4. But anyway, Allegant starts off right where the second one left off. Kate Winslet is dead. The faction system is over with. Chicago is in complete chaos. Naomi Watts and Octavia Spencer have different ways of ruling the city, and now they're in a bit of a battle for control. But Shailene Woodley and Theo James and the rest of the group want to go beyond the wall to see what is out there, because there is a message at the end of the second film where there's some sort of group out there beyond the wall. They traverse through the wasteland of this post-apocalyptic landscape, and they find out that there are other humans and they are much more technologically advanced. There's some sort of corporation dealing with genetics, and the really sad part about this movie, knowing that information and knowing every other young adult novel that's been adapted into film recently, you know exactly where this movie is going. Now let me tell you, I didn't mind the first two Divergent movies. Granted, I didn't think they were great. I wasn't that huge of a fan of them, but I didn't think they were absolutely awful either. They felt like they had their place among this genre, and while they did stick to certain cliches of the genre, they were different enough where I could tell them apart from the rest of them. Allegant, however, is pretty much just as bad as the fifth wave. But it's not completely terrible. There are some good things about it. For one, I thought all the acting was still good. Miles Teller's character was probably the most interesting character because he's just such a sneaky backstabber, which we know from the other two films. But he definitely had a more impactful role in this film than he did the other two films. I thought Theo James did a better job as 4 than he did the other two films. He was kind of more the main character in this film. He did a little bit more of the action than Tris did, or Shailene Woodley did. However, as far as acting-wise goes, there were a few other people that just seemed to be there. Like, I can't think of anything particularly bad to say about their performances, but at the same time, they just felt that they were just being the tag-alongs in this movie. Such as Zoe Kravitz. She didn't really do much in this movie, and I wish she would have, because she had a bit of a more important role in the first one, was sort of forgotten about in the second one, and in this one, she's just sort of there. She's just like tags along, basically. That's the only use she has in this movie. And even a big star like Jeff Daniels, he didn't really do much in this film. I mean, granted, he's pretty much the main villain, or the backstabber that we all know is going to happen in the trailer, but he just felt like your typical bad guy in these types of movies. There wasn't much going for his character or for him. Even Tris's character was sort of forgotten in this movie, and she's the main character of the trilogy. Like in this one, she's no longer the badass that actually fights and stuff. She just goes along with what Jeff Daniels says and just completely goes along with everything, and she's just sort of going through the motions through this movie. Until the very end, and then some of the stuff at the beginning. The whole middle section, she doesn't really do much, honestly. And it's pretty much 4 that does all the action and actually gets the story progressing. At least in this particular film. Now, Insurgent, I didn't mind that much because I thought it had some decent action film sequences. So I was hoping they would improve upon the action of the second one for this film, but it's only little brief moments of sequences within an action scene that were good. The rest were just sort of like, eh. There was one good action sequence in this movie, and that was the plane fight. Well, they're in a plane and 4 fights a bunch of people while he's in this cargo plane of some sort. And I thought that action sequence was really good and brutal, and I almost wish that the film was R so that it could go even greater in that action scene, because sometimes there's an action scene in PG-13 movies where I see it and I'm like, okay, this is great, But an R rating would have made it better, and I almost wish for an R-rated version of that scene. I don't know, maybe that's just me. There's also decent ideas in this film, but for the most part, it's all the same stuff you expect in the young adult adaptation novel genre. That's really all I can say about the goods for this movie. Some good performances, some decent action moments in action scenes, and one good action scene. That's it. That's all I can say about. That's all of the good in Allegant. For one, the movie is way too predictable. Now, other young adult novels that got adapted into films were predictable as well, but for me, Allegant is the most predictable I've seen that's been adapted to film. There's a certain point in this movie where I just keep seeing new ideas brought into this film, and I realize, hey, that's from Maze Runner. Hey, that's from Hunger Games. Hey, that sounds really familiar too. Now, one of the reasons I didn't like Fifth Wave is because I felt it was just a combination of all the other young adult novel adaptations, and it just felt like a total mess of all of them while being really predictable. But I think Allegant does that a little bit more than the Fifth Wave. Almost every scene in this movie, as it's being played out, I think, okay, I bet this happens. Oh, I bet the twist is that. Oop, guess I was right. There's even a scene, okay, this was actually hilarious to me, okay? There's this character that dies, and because this is not a spoiler review, I'm not going to say the name of the character who dies. I'm just going to give you a little bit of the layout of the scene so that you can understand who this character who's died and who I'm talking about, without giving names, so that when you see the movie you know which scene I'm talking about. Anyway, there's this scene where they have to run up the wall to get over it, to get to the wasteland, or whatever they call it in this movie. I think it's the Fringe or something like that. Because I guess Scorch has already been used. But there's a scene where bad guys are trying to stop them and shooting them as they're running up the wall. And they're shooting back and defending themselves. Well, someone turns their back to the action. Because they think, oh, we're safely on the wall. They can't possibly shoot us. And as this person's turning around, the sad music cues up. And you just know, you know what? She turned her back. Sad music. This person's gonna die. And then about a minute and a half after the sad music started, suddenly she gets shot and dies. The funny thing that happened in this movie is when that moment happened, there's a person behind me that had said, "Who was that character again?" And I almost started laughing right then and there because, quite frankly, I had no connection with that character because she is in the other movies, but she has such a small role in the other movies that she doesn't really have that much of an impact when she dies. And so when it tries to be important and tries to be sad and tries to hit you with all the feels of this character dying, I felt nothing but laughter. But that's all I felt. But other than the predictability of this film, which is easily the worst part of the film, the second worst part of this film is almost equally as terrible and atrocious, and that is the CGI and the green screen. The first scene that happens in the movie, well, I think it's the second scene actually, it's Triss and Four, they're climbing up this building, and you can see the destroyed looking Chicago in the background, and the wall, and the wasteland. And it's definitely a green screen shot, but it actually looks good. It looks realistic. It actually looks like, hey, this actually is going to have good CGI and green screen. Well, you better savor that one scene because that's the only good green screen in this entire film. Like, there's almost no flaws to this green screen effect. And then everything else, all the other green screen, it's cartoony and just terrible looking. They got some really good professionals to do this one scene, fired them, and then got other people to do the rest of the movie. It's that terribly different. And then even some of the technological advancements that these characters had, it was making the theater laugh. There are many moments in this movie where we see some new technology in the film and it tries to be all sophisticated and scientific, and we are just completely laughing throughout the whole theater was laughing. One of those scenes is, for some reason, they couldn't just travel with these people to the genetic facility because our heroes were contaminated because they were in this terrible wasteland. And so instead of putting them in suits or having them ride in a separate car, what they do is they put a bubble shield around it. And I'm not kidding. This is amber colored bubble shield that picks them up and they float alongside the ships. It was one of the most comical things I've seen in a movie. Without spoiling the ending or the implications of this, there is a gas, a CGI gas in this movie at the end of the film. And it's supposed to have you on the edge of your seat. You're supposed to be worried about these characters that are among the gas and before it can reach their nose and infect them with stuff. You're supposed to be worried about the characters, but all I could think about throughout the entire scene, whenever this gas was in it, all I could think about is, does the gas really work that way? Like, there's so many moments where the gas isn't rising to them. It just slowly at knee level and just keeps staying there, and there's some weird stuff with the gas. Another moment that most of us laughed in the theater is the cliffhanger ending. The way it was executed was just so stupid. Everyone was laughing rather than clapping. But fans of young adult novel adaptations that don't mind all the cliches and aren't affected by complete predictability, or haven't seen enough cliches to realize how predictable the film is, they can still get a kick out of this movie. Even though there is a lot of bad things about this movie, I still was kind of entertained. And I still do like it a little bit more than The Fifth Wave, but I'm going to give it the same exact score, and that is 2 stars for Allegant. So did you see Allegant, and what did you think about it? So did you see Allegant? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. If not, what is the worst young adult adaptation on film? And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my videos playlist of 2015 and 2016 movie reviews. As always, this is BruceGifford, and this was Just My Opinion.